Hello everyone, welcome to our podcast. My name is Nick and I'm the growth marketing lead of Phibious Vietnam. Phibious is a digital creative agency and we have a different expertise. We are very strong in creative and content, media and performance, growth marketing, influencer marketing, but also e-commerce. This podcast is brought to you also by MoEngage. MoEngage is an intelligent customer engagement and analytic platform that helps brands globally track the users across app, web, offline sources, and analyze the trends to identify opportunities which allow advanced segmentation based on the data and further cross-engagement across push, email, SMS, WhatsApp, and more. MoEngage serves over 550 clients across retail, travel, and hospitality, telecom, financial services, and more with brands like Nestle, Tokopedia, Oyo Room, T-Mobile as partners globally. So this is our second episode. Our first episode was with ASUS marketing team in Vietnam. So if you missed it, go check in the links in the description. And now for the second episode, we are going to focus on e-commerce in Vietnam, the big players, main challenges, and best practices. I have the pleasure to welcome our guest, Miss Jenny Phung. So she's holding an MBA from INSEAD and has worked the past 2 years at Shopee, which is one of the biggest marketplaces in Vietnam currently. Hello, Jenny, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Nicolas.
How are you?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I suppose I'll elaborate a little bit on who I am. So my name is Jenny. I'm a Vietnamese Canadian, and I have a background in finance. That's where I started off. I worked in France in a boutique investment bank that focused on raising funds for projects in emerging markets.
Yes.
I eventually did my MBA at INSEAD, as Nicolas mentioned. And after my MBA, I joined Shopee in Vietnam. That's where I've been for the last 2.5 years. And at Shopee, you need to be very flexible and adaptable to the roles. So I did many projects from marketing to business development. Particularly in the last year, I was the lead of project management office. So what that means is I manage projects from for example, growing a new category for the platform to performing competitor research and analysis in order to propose new initiatives.
Okay. So very, very interesting. So for the schedule of this podcast, we are going to have several segments. We're going to start about introducing, Jenny is going to introduce the various e-commerce players in Vietnam. Then we are going to talk about the buyers and take a look at the client perspective, and then we are going to really deep dive with the e-commerce sellers, brand perspective, the main challenges for the marketplaces like Shopee. We'll have a small segment about COVID-19. So right now Vietnam is in a state which is almost post COVID-19. We'll deep dive in it, and then we'll give our general vision for e-commerce in Vietnam and advices for brands that are trying to tackle this very big industry. So starting with the e-commerce players, Jenny, could you describe the current landscape in Vietnam?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the current landscape in Vietnam, so we have quite a few players. We have Shopee, we have Lazada, we have Tiki, Sendo, quite a few players. And sometimes from an outsider perspective, it's hard to understand what is the difference between these platforms. So I think to have a better understanding of how are they different, we can try to focus on 3 criteria that I think would be key. The first would be in terms of funding. So where do these platforms get their money from? Second is, how did they start their business? Did they start their business by focusing on a B2C model or a C2C model? And the last key factor that we should consider is, who are their target customers? So using these 3 criteria, I'm going to kind of give examples of how they're different. So the first criteria is in terms of funding. So where do they get their money from? Why is this important? It's important because it allows us to understand which platforms have the financial resources to really quickly and aggressively scale their business. Yes. So as of now, Shopee and Lazada, they have that advantage because they have very rich parents. Yes. The remaining players, such as Tiki and Sando, they have to face the daunting task of raising funding.
Yes.
So how does that translate? That means Shopee and Lazada, they are more likely to have very aggressive shipping and product promotions in order to acquire buyers and remain in the game to scale their business.
So Lazada is backed by Alibaba, if I'm correct, right?
Yes. So Lazada is backed by Alibaba, and Shopee is backed by Garena, which is then backed by Tencent.
Okay. Very clear. Okay, so very interesting. So you mentioned different type of funding, different type of business model. Have they all started with a B2C model, or have you noticed a different positioning at first for some of those players?
Mm-hmm. So this is also another key factor as to how they're different. So did they start off as B2C, which normally means they partner with brands first? So normally, when a platform partners with brands first, we observe two key elements. The first is that in order to scale, they take a longer time than if they started off as C2C. The reason is because when you partner with brands, you can have thousands of products, but when you partner with C2C sellers, you can have millions of products in a shorter amount of time. So, for example, Shopee, they started off as a C2C model and therefore was able to scale very fast. Now they have the widest assortment of products on the market. They are starting to shift towards acquiring brands in order to have better branding and trust among buyers. Compare this to, for example, Lazada and Tiki. They started off with brands first, and then now are only introducing C2C.
Okay. Yeah. So it must be. I don't know if you worked on that specific project at Shopee, but it must be very hard for one of those marketplaces to really differentiate from another one, apart from the promotions, and because all the big brands are present on every marketplaces. So how to really to differentiate and to stand out of the competition? Have you worked on those challenges at Shopee?
Mm-hmm. So it is definitely a very competitive field, especially when these platforms, their end goal is very similar. Their end goal is to scale as fast as possible and then monetize by introducing other services like paid ads, like online payments, etc. So it is definitely challenging, and the trick here is to go very fast. Yes. And hopefully, while going fast, you will be able to provide the service better than your competitors. So for example, for brands, we have internal teams with very aggressive KPIs to partner and acquire as many brands as possible.
I see. Okay, so I think we can move on to the e-commerce buyers right now. So looking at the client perspective, e-commerce adoption in Vietnam, I mean it's really growing like spectacularly. What do you think the Vietnamese people are looking for when they start buying online instead of buying or going directly to stores?
So I would say that at this economic stage in Vietnam, Vietnamese buyers, they remain largely price sensitive. They do value convenience, but most do not value convenience enough to accept a fee in exchange. The majority are still attracted to good deals in the form of product discounts or just lower shipping fees. Of course, this is a very sweeping statement because there are certain categories where we will observe that buyers, they do value quality and on authenticity more than price. And these categories, they tend to be more expensive, and their value of the product tends to be derived from know-how technology. So categories such as electronics or cosmetics.
Okay. So as you just mentioned, good deals first, and depending on the categories. Any other key points for those big platforms that we just mentioned on the first segment to really crack the user acquisition in Vietnam, apart from promotions? So for example, Lazada is very aggressive with I've seen with a lot of with their birthdays and 9, 10, 10, 11, 11. Have you noticed? I think so. It was basically a race to acquire the most users. Have you seen? Basically, usually when we speak about marketplace, there's always like an inflection point when you have enough users to start acquiring organically much more. Have we passed that stage in Vietnam, according to you, or do you still need to spend a lot of money to acquire user very fast?
I suppose the quick answer is we are not at that stage in Vietnam yet where the platforms have finished scaling. So e-commerce is an economies of scale business model. You start making money and profits after you've reached a huge volume of transactions. And right now, what we observe in the platform is they are still very competitive, fighting aggressively to acquire new users, and are not that yet focused on generating profits.
Okay.
They are just trying to grow very fast.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can look at the journey of Amazon that spent decades to start making profit. And from some days they woke up and they were starting to make huge profit, and now it's like exponential, and they are, I think I read that they are generating half of the online purchase in the United States are going through Amazon. So it's huge. That's why the race is so competitive, because the reward is
yes, exactly.
Okay, so talking about the sellers now, the brands perspective, like there's two options for them if they want to tackle and to enter the e-commerce game. Like they can either partners with marketplaces or try to launch their own e-commerce. So what's your vision about that?
So regarding what should brands do in this landscape? So like the two roads that they can take when trying to establish the online sales channel is either have their own website or to partner with e-commerce platforms. And in my opinion, they should pursue actually both of these when trying to establish the online sales, because of I think three very important considerations. The first is the operational complexity of setting up these channels. The second is the sales potential of these different channels. And the third is what kind of customer data they could get. So in the short term, brands, they can partner with e-commerce platforms to reduce the operational complexity of setting up the end-to-end operations online, like order fulfillment and giving customer service. They will also be able to tap into larger sales potential, because these e-commerce platforms, they have huge volumes of traffic that as a brand alone would take a lot of time to generate from their own website. So that's a benefit in the short term. In the long term, brands, they should have access to their own customers and their own customers' purchasing data. And why is this important? If we compare Vietnam to, say, China and in the US, so the e-commerce sales as a percentage of total retail in those countries right now are around 27% and 16% respectively. In Vietnam, that's only 4.5%. So we can project that online sales will only grow in importance, and brands should invest for the long term.
I see. Yeah, as you said, like sales potential is huge, and if you're a brand and if you want to start making profit right away, for sure that it will be much easier with marketplaces. You won't have to buy any traffic. and you will benefit from their huge growth and for their own investment to scale. Yes, the downside would be the data. Although most platforms like Shopee or Lazada I guess are sharing more and more data to the brands in terms of their competitors, of their rank on the platform for each category. So they share part of the data, but I would say not enough data about on the customer level. So brands cannot really build any loyalty through marketplaces. So I think that's what you meant, that it's very important for a brand to have this direct to consumer e-commerce option, so they can connect directly with their customers. So the option might be, correct me if I'm wrong, like maybe to start with a marketplace, maybe if for a brand that is not doing any e-commerce operation right now in Vietnam, maybe to start with marketplaces to get your customer get used to buy your products online, and maybe then launch your own e-commerce and bring much more value and in terms of customer experience, and try to provide more services.
Yeah, so I do agree. In the short term, especially for brands that do not yet have the brand image in Vietnam, and they have to educate their customers on what kind of products they have, who they are, it's definitely faster, more convenient by partnering with e-commerce platforms first to test the market, and then launch your own website after.
Okay. So let's discuss a little bit about the challenges now. So first one would be I want to address the profitability, because we're talking about marketplaces that are heavily backed by rich parents, I would say. So it's still a big challenge, because we've seen some startups like Le Flair or Aderoy or Lot closed, and they were backed, but maybe not enough, and they had issues with profitability. So what's your take on it, and how can a brand optimize a little bit, or what are the key points on the supply chain that affect the profitability of a marketplace?
So I think e-commerce platforms, some platforms we've seen kind of they've given up and they've exited the market. And I think funding, as I mentioned before, is a big part of it. This is an economies of scale business. So if you're not willing to invest the big amount of funding in the beginning in order to reach that scale, you're not going to last in this race, because it is a marathon. It's not a small sprint. And those platforms that will eventually scale, they will then change their focus from scaling, basically from growth, to monetizing. And then they'll start to introduce other services to then recuperate what they invested in the beginning. So Le Flair, Adezoy, etc. I would say that they probably did not expect the small cash coming in as they originally planned.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of logistics, so logistics in Vietnam is a major topic, and it might be part of the key aspect to win the race. One big part to succeed in e-commerce. So can you walk us through the main challenges of logistics in Vietnam, and what's the local landscape here?
So I would say the logistics in Vietnam, comparative to other Southeast Asian countries, we're actually very good in Vietnam, because we have a lot of players and the service is very competitive between them. So we have GHN, we have GHTK, Viettel Post, Vien Post, and then we have new entrants like Ninja Van. So in terms of e-commerce platforms choosing who they should partner with for which campaigns, etc., that's actually not a problem for e-commerce. I think what is a problem would be the logistics players themselves, because they are starting to see a lot of competition, not only with purely logistics companies, but in the future also with e-commerce platforms themselves, because these e-commerce platforms, they are slowly investing in their own extensive network of logistics, so their own warehouses, their own fleets, starting from the big cities and then branching out to the more rural cities.
Okay. In terms of logistics, do you have in mind the latest advancement of big marketplaces? Like I read, like it was maybe 2-hour delivery. Has anyone be able to done even better than that, or?
So these e-commerce platforms, they are definitely testing. 2-hour deliveries is one of the best delivery times on the market right now. And even then, 2-hour delivery is only limited to certain areas of very big cities like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh. So I would say that e-commerce platforms, they are investing in logistics and they are testing to see what are the boundaries, how fast can they deliver and what can they promise to their customers.
Okay. Great. Moving on to a payment method, and having worked before joining Phibious in a brand doing e-commerce, I noticed that we were using Shopify, and I would say that 98% of our orders we were providing, the customers were choosing cash on delivery. So
Right.
is it similar for marketplaces, and what's the current state of credit card payment in Vietnam?
Okay, so yes, so in Vietnam, I would say that for e-commerce, more than 90% of the orders are cash on delivery and not through online payments. And this is very particular even in Southeast Asia. Vietnam is a very cash-based economy, and I would say that I believe like 1/3 of the population, only 1/3 of the population actually have an account at a financial institution. In terms of what this means for e-commerce, it's actually a con, because when we compare it to other economies, we do see a positive correlation between online payment and how much they're willing to spend online. So to kind of tackle this challenging problem, e-commerce platforms and payment solutions, online payment solutions, would have to work together with the government to pass certain regulations to facilitate online payments and the onboarding of e-wallet users. So for example, instead of opening an account by going to an offline sales point, the regulations should enable users to just sign up an account without having to go anywhere face to face.
Okay. Very clear. Let's move on to the small segment about COVID-19. So business impacts on marketplaces and brand responses. Have you seen any interesting response from marketplaces or brands in Vietnam during this special time?
So in general, e-commerce has benefited quite a bit from the social distancing measures put in place, because people are trying to avoid leaving their homes and making their offline purchases, and therefore they're doing this online. And because of this, the lockdown that was in place, the Vietnamese government did have to reach out to the e-commerce ecosystem to ensure that everything would remain operational and that everything would actually have more capacity to manage larger volumes. In terms of brands, they are starting to see that there is some risk diversification that they can benefit if they also have an online sales channel rather than just offline.
Okay. And your vision regarding COVID-19 in Vietnam, like so to give our listeners a little bit of perspective. So we are today at the end of May. There's not been any contagion in Vietnam for more than a month right now. The only few cases were coming from abroad and were directly quarantined. So brands are reopening. Social distancing is no more right now in Vietnam. So what's your global vision about it? Are we completely over it? And how do you think brands should adapt? Like should have their strategy for the end of the year and the next few years?
So I would say that it's still too early to say that COVID-19 is behind us, because frankly, we still don't have a vaccine. In terms of what can brands do about this, because we don't know how long this is going to last, perhaps the lockdown is lifted, but a few months down the road, if there is a second wave, what does that mean? That means that brands, they should, as I mentioned, diversify by going online. Don't completely focus on your offline sales channel. And if you're going to go online, then there are two ways that you can do this. Partnering directly with e-commerce platforms, which is fast and relatively cheaper than investing completely in your own website and setting up your own operations to fulfill online orders. And then after you're comfortable with that sales channel, you can then think of the longer term, invest in your own website. I think that is the safer bet than just expecting that this virus is over and you can go back to focusing on your offline sales channel.
Yes, very interesting. About that, I would really recommend brands to marketplaces to consider and to study the shift of mindset of their customers. Because we all have COVID-19. I've changed many customers' perspective. So understanding their new needs, their new fears, their new requirements, and adapting your marketing through that, and it should be fine. Ending this interview with your vision for e-commerce and marketplaces in Vietnam. Who's gonna win the race? You don't. Do you have a favorite pick? But more seriously, what's your global vision about marketplaces in Vietnam? So right now we still have 4 very big players. I heard that Sendo and Tiki were going to merge. What's your global vision for marketplaces in Vietnam?
So I would say for e-commerce in Vietnam, believe it or not, I still think it's too early to say who's going to win this battle because it is still in the scaling phase. But if I really had to put my money and bet on one of these platforms, I'm going to put my money on the platforms with the richest parents. So it's either Shopee or Lazada. And since I worked for Shopee, I'm just going to go ahead and choose my bias and say I'll put my money on Shopee winning. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think it's still possible to launch a marketplace in Vietnam and succeed? And I'm sure you're gonna say that it depends if your parents are rich enough. But maybe if you choose a niche perspective, it might require a little bit less money. Do you think it's possible, or it's just a utopia?
So this is a very complicated question. So if I answer it very simply, I would have to say that you still have hope if 1, you have a very good product, and 2, you have access to the money to scale such a business. Because I said it's very competitive. If you have an offering that is unique and not yet on the market, then just make sure that it's very simple and easily communicated to your users. There is still opportunities for niche e-commerce platforms because right now what we see are mass e-commerce platforms where they just kind of sell everything to everybody. So if your offering is going to be different, there's still a chance. Okay.
And yeah, regarding your niche, you might not need as massive investment to scale the business. That's the hope we can have, is to see some businesses succeeding with a little bit less money than the big brands. Okay, so thanks everyone for listening to this podcast. Like us and subscribe if you want to don't miss the next episodes. Thanks Jenny for joining us today. It was very interesting to have your perspective, and I'm sure we could talk about hours on e-commerce. It's really passionate and very complex, I'm sure, to understand and to navigate in that area. So for all the listeners, if you have any questions, please you can ask your question in the comments below. And so thanks, Jenny. I hope to see you soon, and I wish you a great journey. And yeah, let's keep the discussion later.
Okay, thank you, Nicolas. So thanks for having me, and I hope that the audience found my insights useful.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.